The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. When they looked at humanity, they saw small ships and old technology. They counted the human fleet and found it weak. They measured human weapons and found them simple. They calculated how long a war would last and decided it would be over in weeks. What they did not see was what humanity had been hiding. Admiral Grace. Kelly was 71 years old, but her mind was sharper than officers half her age. For 40 years, she had worked in the shadows. While the rest of humanity lived in peace, she had been preparing for war. Not because she wanted it, but because she knew that peace never lasted forever. Deep beneath the mountains of Mars, in tunnels that did not appear on any map, her teams had built things that should not have existed. Ships faster than anything in the galaxy. Weapons that could tear through the strongest shields. Artificial minds that could think and react faster than any living creature. The Valkyrie think we are farmers, she told her officers as they gathered in the secret command center. They think we spent 300 years growing food and trading goods. They are half right. We did those things, but we also remembered what we are. She brought up a display showing the hidden fleet. Rows upon rows of warships appeared, each one more advanced than the last. Humanity has always been a species that survives. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues. We survived ourselves. And now we will survive this. Lieutenant Commander Tony Reeves had spent 10 years flying cargo ships between human colonies. He was good at his job, but it bored him. He had always wanted something more. What nobody knew was that his cargo runs were a cover. Every few months, he would disappear for a week to train on fighter craft that officially did not exist. When the call came, Tony was ready. He reported to a hidden base inside an asteroid and found 3,000 other pilots waiting for him. They were men and women from every human world, all of them trained in secret, all of them ready to fight. Today, we stop pretending, their commander told them. Today, we show them who we really are. The Valkyrie fleet at Kepler 442 had been waiting for the human response. They expected a small force of desperate ships making a hopeless last stand. It would be sad, really. Like watching insects fight against a storm, what came out of hyperspace was not what they expected. The Vengeance was the first to arrive. She was 3 kilometers long, covered in weapons that glowed with strange energy. Behind her came the Defiance and the Judgment, each one just as massive, just as deadly. And behind them came 100 more ships that had never appeared on any scanner, never been recorded in any database. Captain Samuel Brooks commanded the Vengeance. He was a quiet man who loved poetry and called his mother every Sunday. He did not look like a warrior, but his mind worked in ways that even he did not fully understand. He could see patterns in chaos. He could predict what enemies would do before they knew themselves. Valkyrie fleet configuration on screen, his tactical officer, Lieutenant Nicole Gray, reported. 37 capital ships, 200 support vessels, standard attack formation. Brooks studied the display for a long moment. Then he almost smiled. They are using the same tactics they have used for 1,000 years, he said. Formation Alpha 7, weapons free on my mark. The Valkyrie commander saw the human fleet and felt the first tiny seed of doubt. These ships were not in any intelligence report. These weapons were not supposed to exist. But he pushed the doubt away. Numbers was still on his side. Experience was still on his side. He ordered the attack. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. The human ships moved in ways that should have been impossible. They seemed to know where every Valkyrie weapon would fire before it happened. Their own weapons struck with perfect accuracy, tearing through shields that had never been breached. Tony Reeves led his fighter squadron through the chaos. His small craft danced between massive warships, avoiding fire that should have killed him 100 times. He fired his weapons and watched Valthyri's ships break apart. His heart was pounding, his hands were steady, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he was laughing. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, every Valthyri ship had been destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 12 fighters and 1 frigate. 12 versus 230-7. It was not a victory. It was a message. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Brooks watched the last Valthyri ship go dark. Lieutenant Gray was staring at her screens with wide eyes. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "We prepared," Brooks replied simply. They did not. Across the galaxy, sensors recorded what had happened. The data was shared, analyzed, and shared again. Species that had laughed at humanity's declaration of war stopped laughing. The Kreth Collective held an emergency meeting that lasted 3 days. The Zanari Empire began quietly moving its fleets closer to home, and in the halls of the Galactic Concord, where Ambassador Park had been mocked just days before, there was only silence. The representatives stared at each other, none of them willing to speak first. They had all assumed they knew what humanity was. They had all been wrong. The Valthyri Dominion received the news of their fleet's destruction and refused to believe it at first. There had to be some mistake, some trick, some explanation that made sense, but there was no mistake. There was only the truth, cold and hard and terrifying. A species they had dismissed as nothing had just destroyed one of their finest fleets in less time than it took to eat lunch. The Valthyri High Council met to discuss their response. Some wanted to send more ships. Some wanted to call for help from the other great powers. Some wanted to negotiate. But deep down, all of them felt something they had not felt in 10,000 years. Something that made their 4 eyes blink and their gray skin go pale. They felt fear. Humanity was awake. And the galaxy would never be the same. For 300 years, humanity had been nothing special in the eyes of the galaxy. They were a small species living on 12 colony worlds, trading goods with their neighbors and causing no trouble. The great powers of the galaxy, the Valthyri Dominion, the Kreth Collective, and the Zanari Empire, barely knew humans existed. To them, Earth and its colonies were like a small shop in the corner of a massive city. Nobody important. Nobody worth thinking about. Commander Daniel Harper had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 22 years. His ship, the Resolute, was old and slow compared to the warships of the great powers. But that was fine because there was never any real danger. His job was simple: patrol the edges of human space, file reports, and make sure nothing went wrong. Nothing ever did. His communications officer, Lieutenant Maria Santos, had joined the fleet 5 years ago hoping for excitement. She had grown up watching old movies about space battles and brave heroes. The reality was very different. Most days, she sat at her station watching empty space and drinking too much coffee. The most exciting thing that happened was when they spotted a comet. Daniel and Maria often talked during the long quiet hours of patrol. They had become good friends over the years. Both of them wondered if they had made the right choice joining the fleet. Both of them secretly wished for something more. They would soon get their wish, though not in the way they wanted. The Valthyri were an ancient species. They had been building empires when humans were still learning to make fire. Their ships were massive and powerful. Their technology was thousands of years ahead of anything humanity possessed. And they had decided they wanted the Kepler 442 system. The problem was that humans already lived there. New Haven was the name of the colony on Kepler 442b. 4 million people called it home. They had built cities and farms over 3 generations. Children had been born there who had never seen Earth. Old people had died there and been buried in its soil. It was not just a colony anymore. It was home. The Valthyri fleet arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning. 37 massive warships appeared at the edge of the system, their weapons hot and ready. The colony's small defense force, 3 old frigates and a dozen patrol boats, could do nothing but watch. The Valtteri High Commander sent one message to the people of New Haven. His face appeared on every screen in the colony. He was tall and gray-skinned, with 4 eyes that showed no emotion at all. "You have 7 of your Earth days to leave this system," he said. "The Valtteri Dominion claims this world and all its resources. Take what you can carry. Leave what you cannot. There will be no discussion. There will be no payment for your losses. This is not a request." The transmission ended. The Valtteri ships moved into orbit around the planet and waited on Earth. The news spread like fire. People watched the footage of the Valtteri fleet and felt something cold settle in their stomachs. Fear, yes, but also anger. A slow, burning anger that grew hotter with each passing hour. President Catherine Moore was 63 years old. She had gray hair and kind eyes and 3 grandchildren who visited her every Sunday. She had spent her career building things, schools, hospitals, trade agreements. She had never wanted to be a war president. She had never imagined she would need to be. But as she watched the Valtteri message, something changed in her. She thought of the 4 million people on New Haven. She thought of the children who would lose their homes, the old people who would die on crowded evacuation ships, the families who would lose everything they had built. And she felt the same anger that was spreading across all of human space that her advisors told her to accept the situation. The Valtteri were too strong. Fighting would mean death for millions. Better to lose one colony than to lose everything. Moore listened to them all. Then she called Ambassador James Park and told him to go to the Galactic Concord. "Ask them for help," she said. "Ask them to stop this." Park did as he was told. He traveled to the great station where all the powers of the galaxy met to discuss their problems. He stood before the assembled representatives and made his case. He spoke of justice and fairness and the rights of peaceful species to live without fear. The Valtteri ambassador laughed at him. Actually laughed, right there in the great chamber. "Humans are not a power," she said. "You are tenants living in a galaxy that belongs to others. Be grateful we are giving you time to leave. Be grateful we are not simply destroying you." Park looked around the chamber for support. The Kreth representative looked away. The Sonari High Arbiter studied her notes. A dozen other species suddenly found their shoes very interesting. Nobody would help. Nobody would even speak. Park returned to Earth with nothing. He stood before President Moore and told her what had happened. He expected her to cry, or to rage, or to simply give up. Instead, she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had made a hard decision and was at peace with it. "Then we help ourselves," she said. The United Earth Council met in emergency session. The debate lasted for 18 hours. Some wanted to surrender. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to try more diplomacy. In the end, it came down to a simple vote. And when the votes were counted, the result was clear. Humanity would not run. Humanity would not beg. Humanity would fight. President Moore broadcast her message to every human world, every ship, every station. She spoke simply and clearly, the way she always did. For 300 years, we have been good neighbors. We have traded fairly. We have helped when we could. We have asked for nothing but to be left in peace. And now they come to take our homes, and the galaxy tells us to accept it. She paused and looked directly into the camera. We will not. To the Valtteri Dominion and to all who support them, hear this. Humanity is no longer asking for permission to exist. We are no longer hoping for your kindness. You have made your choice. Now we make ours. She took a deep breath. As of this moment, The United Earth government declares a state of war against the Velthari Dominion. May God forgive us for what comes next. Across the galaxy, species that had never paid attention to humanity suddenly stopped what they were doing. They read the declaration again, certain they had misunderstood. A minor species declaring war on one of the great powers? It was madness. It was suicide. The Velthari High Command received the news and smiled. This would be easier than they thought. The humans would come to them, and they would be destroyed. Then the Dominion would take not just one colony, but all 12. A fitting punishment for such arrogance. They had no idea what was coming. The news of the Velthari defeat spread through the galaxy like a disease. Every species, every world, every power heard the same impossible story. A minor species had destroyed a great fleet. The insects had crushed the giant. The Velthari Dominion was humiliated. For thousands of years, they had been conquerors. They had taken what they wanted, and nobody had ever stopped them. Now they had been beaten by creatures they considered barely intelligent. Their pride demanded blood. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session. Representatives from 100 species filled the great chamber, all of them talking at once. The Velthari ambassador stood at the center and demanded action. "This is an act of unprovoked aggression," she declared. "Humanity must be punished. The Concord must intervene." But humanity had sent its own representative. Ambassador Paul Martinez was not a professional diplomat. He had been a history teacher at a small school in Ohio before the war. President Moore had chosen him because he understood something important. Sometimes, simple truth was more powerful than clever words. Martinez walked to the center of the chamber. Every eye in the room turned to watch him. He was not tall or impressive. He looked like exactly what he was, an ordinary man who had been thrust into extraordinary circumstances. "You speak of aggression," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Let me tell you what aggression looks like. Aggression is 37 warships appearing in our sky. Aggression is telling 4 million people to leave their homes in 7 days or die. Aggression is laughing at us when we asked for help." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of those who would meet his gaze. "We did not start this war. We did not want this war. We wanted only to live in peace. But when someone comes to take your home and nobody will help you, you have 2 choices. You can run, or you can fight." He paused. "We chose to fight." The Kreth representative made a hissing sound that meant disgust. "You are a minor species. You do not make decisions. You do not challenge your betters." Martinez turned to face the Kreth directly. "That is interesting. The Velthari had 37 capital ships. We destroyed them in 11 minutes. Perhaps you should reconsider who the minor species is." Silence fell over the chamber. Nobody had ever spoken to a great power that way. Nobody had ever dared. While the diplomats talked, the war continued. Colonel Rachel Dawson led the ground forces that were sent to take back the mining outposts the Velthari had occupied before the war began. She was 42 years old and had been a firefighter before joining the military. She understood what it meant to walk toward danger when everyone else was running away. Her soldiers were not the biggest or strongest in the galaxy. The Velthari troops were taller, heavier, and had natural armor on their skin. On paper, they should have won every fight, but paper does not fight wars. People do. Private Danny Cole was 19 years old when he made his first combat drop. He was so scared that his hand shook as he checked his weapon. He had grown up on a farm in Kansas, and until 6 months ago, the most dangerous thing he had ever done was fix a broken tractor. The drop pod hit the ground hard, and Danny stumbled out into chaos. Weapons fire filled the air. Soldiers were shouting. Somewhere nearby, something exploded. His squad leader, Sergeant Ann Mitchell, had been shot in the first minute. She was still alive, but could not move. The rest of the squad looked at each other, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Danny did not think about being brave. He did not think about being a hero. He just saw that someone needed to pick up the tactical display and lead them forward. So he did. "Follow me," he said, and his voice did not shake at all. They reached their objective. They held it until reinforcements arrived. When it was over, Sergeant Mitchell was being loaded onto a medical ship, and Danny was standing in the middle of a captured Velthari base, wondering how he was still alive. "Good work, Private," Colonel Dawson told him as she walked past. "You did what needed doing." Danny nodded and said nothing. He was still too shocked to speak. Across a dozen systems, similar stories were happening. Human soldiers fought against enemies that should have defeated them. They adapted to every weapon, every tactic, every surprise. They took ground and held it. They never gave up, never stopped pushing forward. The Velthari began to understand something terrible. They were not fighting an enemy that could be scared into surrender. They were not fighting an enemy that would accept defeat if enough of them died. They were fighting an enemy that had spent its entire history struggling against extinction and winning. On Earth, President Moore watched the war reports with tired eyes. Every victory was paid for in blood. Every captured system meant more names on the list of the fallen. She had started this war, and she would carry those names with her for the rest of her life. Her chief of staff, Dr. Henry Walsh, brought her coffee and reports every morning. He never asked if she was okay. He knew she was not. But he also knew she would keep going because the alternative was worse. "The Velthari are pulling back from 3 more systems," he told her one morning. "They are concentrating their forces around their core worlds." Moore nodded slowly. "They are getting desperate. Desperate enemies are dangerous. What do you want to do?" She thought for a long moment. "Tell Admiral Kelly to prepare for the final push. But make it clear, we are not invaders. We are not conquerors. We just want this to end." Walsh nodded and left to deliver the message. Moore turned back to her window and looked out at the city beyond. People were going about their lives, working and shopping and living. They trusted her to keep them safe. They trusted her to win this war and bring their soldiers home. She hoped she was worthy of that trust. 6 months had passed since humanity declared war. The galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. The Velthari Dominion, once proud and powerful, was crumbling. Their economy could not support the war. Their military could not stop the humans. Their government was filled with leaders who blamed each other for the disaster. The other great powers watched with growing fear. The Kreth Collective quietly began building more warships. The Sonari Empire moved their fleets away from human space, just in case. Everyone was asking the same question. If the Velthari could fall, who would be next? Admiral Grace Kelly pushed her advantage carefully. The human fleet had grown to over 300 capital ships now, each one more advanced than anything the Velthari could match. But Kelly did not want to destroy. She wanted to win. "We strike at their supply lines," she explained to her captains. "We cut off their fuel. We stop their ammunition. We make it impossible for them to fight. A fleet without supplies is just a collection of metal boxes floating in space." Captain Brooks and the Vengeance led the attacks. They moved like ghosts through Velthari territory, appearing from nowhere, destroying supply stations and fuel depots, then vanishing before any response could arrive. The Velthari sent ships to hunt them, but Brooks always knew where they would look. He was always somewhere else. Lieutenant Commander Tony Reeves had become something of a legend among the pilots. His fighter squadron had destroyed more enemy ships than any other unit in the fleet. Young pilots asked for his autograph. News reporters wanted to interview him. He refused them all. "I am not a hero," he told his wingman one night. "I'm just a guy who got lucky and did not die." His wingman, A young woman named Lisa Chun shook her head. "You are more than that, sir. You give people hope." Tony thought about that for a long time. He was not sure he deserved to be anyone's hope. But if that was what people needed from him, he would try not to let them down. Commander Daniel Harper had changed since the war began. The quiet patrol officer was gone, replaced by a battle commander who had led his ships through a dozen fights. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, his executive officer and now his closest friend, had watched the transformation with wonder. "Do you remember when the most exciting thing we did was spot a comet?" she asked him one evening as they stood on the bridge of the Resolute. Harper almost smiled. "That was a good comet. It was an average comet. You just had very low standards." They both laughed, and for a moment, the war felt very far away. The turning point came at Velthara Prime, the homeworld of the Dominion. The human fleet arrived in force, 200 ships arranged in perfect formation, weapons ready but not firing. They did not attack the planet. They did not target the cities or the factories or the military bases. Instead, they took position in high orbit and waited. Admiral Kelly sent a message that was broadcast to every screen on the planet below. She appeared calm and tired, like a grandmother who had stayed up too late but refused to go to bed until the work was done. "People of Velthara Prime," she said, "we have not come to destroy you. We have come to end this war. Your leaders started this conflict. Your leaders sent fleets to take our homes. Your leaders told us we were nothing and deserved nothing." She paused. "We disagree." She let that sink in for a moment. "We are not asking you to surrender. We are asking you to choose. Give us the leaders who started this war, and we will go home. We will sign a peace treaty. We will leave you alone. But if you choose to keep fighting, we will stay here as long as it takes. We do not want to be your enemies. We just want to live in peace. The choice is yours." The transmission ended. The human fleet waited. On the surface of Velthara Prime, the people watched the human ships in orbit and thought about what the Admiral had said. For generations, they had been told that the Dominion was invincible. They had been told that other species were inferior. They had been told that fear was the only way to maintain order. Now they looked up at the sky and saw the truth. The Dominion was not invincible. Other species were not inferior. And the people who had told them these lies were the same people who had brought this war to their doorstep. Riots began in the capital city within hours. The police tried to stop them, but were overwhelmed. The military received orders to fire on the crowds and refused. Officers who had lost brothers and sons in the war took off their uniforms and joined the protesters. Within a week, the Dominion's ruling council had been arrested by their own guards. A provisional government formed from military officers and civilian leaders sent a message to the human fleet. They wanted peace. Admiral Kelly received the message and read it 3 times to make sure she understood. Then she did something she had not done in 6 months. She cried. President Moore signed the peace treaty in her office on Earth. Her hands were steady, but her heart was heavy. She thought of everyone who had died to make this moment possible. She thought of the families who would never be whole again. She thought of the price that had been paid for peace. "Is it over?" Dr. Walsh asked her quietly. "The war is over," Moore replied. "But the hard work is just beginning. We have to build something better now. We have to prove that we are worth all the blood that was spilled." She put down her pen and looked out the window at the city beyond. Somewhere out there, people were celebrating. They deserved to celebrate. They had earned it, but Moore could not celebrate. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some prices were too high to pay happily. 1 year had passed since the Treaty of Kepler ended the war. The galaxy was not the same place it had been before. Old certainties had been destroyed. Old powers had been humbled. And humanity, once ignored by everyone, was now at the center of everything. The Veltari Dominion still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. Their empire of 1,000 star systems had shrunk to a few hundred. Their military was rebuilding slowly under strict limits set by the peace treaty. Their new government was trying to build something different, something that did not depend on fear and conquest. Ambassador Paul Martinez had returned to teaching. He stood in front of a classroom of young students and told them about history, not just the dates and events, but the choices that shaped them. Power is not just about who has the biggest army, he told them one afternoon. Power is about what you choose to do when you have strength. The galaxy expected us to become conquerors after we won the war. We chose not to. That choice matters more than any battle. A student raised her hand. Why did we choose that, sir? Martinez thought for a moment. Because we remembered what it felt like to be weak. We remember being afraid. And we decided we did not want to make others feel that way. Admiral Grace Kelly had retired to a small house on the shores of Lake Superior. She spent her days fishing and reading and refusing interview requests. Reporters came from across human space, hoping to talk to the woman who had built the secret fleet. She sent them all away. I did what needed doing, she told one persistent journalist. Now I am doing something else. Don't bother someone important. The journalist started to argue but stopped when he saw her eyes. There was something in them, not anger, but weariness. The weariness of someone who had carried too much for too long and was finally allowed to put it down. Captain Samuel Brooks had been promoted to admiral, though he did not feel he deserved it. He still wrote poetry in his spare time, and he still called his mother every Sunday. Some things did not change, even when everything else did. Lieutenant Nicole Gray had become his chief of staff. She organized his schedule and handled his correspondence and made sure he ate lunch when he forgot. They worked well together, two quiet people who understood each other without needing many words. The Resolute had been retired from service and turned into a museum ship. Admiral Daniel Harper and his wife, Maria Santos, attended the dedication ceremony with their 3-month-old daughter sleeping in Maria's arms. Strange to see her like this, Maria said, looking at the ship that had been their home for so many years. Harper nodded. She did her job. Now she gets to rest. They walked through the ship together, pointing out places they remembered. The bridge where Maria had worked. The small kitchen where Harper had learned to cook. The observation deck where they had watched stars pass by during long patrol shifts. Do you miss it? Maria asked. Sometimes, Harper admitted. But I would rather be here with you and her. He looked down at their daughter, still sleeping peacefully. This is better. Colonel Rachel Dawson had not retired. She stayed in the military, training the next generation of soldiers. She told them stories about the war, not the glorious parts, but the terrible ones. She wanted them to understand what they were signing up for. Victory has a price, she told each new class. Make sure you know what you are paying before you sign the check. Some of them listened. Some of them did not. Dawson had learned that you could not force wisdom on people. You could only offer it and hope they were smart enough to take it. Danny Cole had gone home to Kansas. He was Sergeant Cole now, but he did not use the title much. He helped his father run the family farm, fixing tractors and planting crops and watching the seasons. Change. Sometimes at night, he woke up reaching for a weapon that was not there. Sometimes he heard explosions that existed only in his memory. But the nightmares came less often now. And he had learned to find peace in simple things. The smell of rain, the color of wheat at sunset, the sound of his mother singing in the kitchen. President Catherine Moore had served out her term and refused to run again. In her final address, she spoke not of victory but of responsibility. We have proven that humanity cannot be conquered, she said, her voice still clear and strong. But that is not what matters most. What matters most is what we do with the peace we have won. We must be the neighbors we wished we had, not because we are weak, but because we choose to be kind. We must show the galaxy that strength and compassion are not enemies, but partners. She stepped down from office and moved to a small house near her grandchildren. She planted a garden and learned to paint, and tried to forget the names of everyone who had died under her command. She could not forget, of course, but she could learn to carry the weight. The Galactic Concord had been forced to change. The old rules, built on the idea that power was everything, no longer worked. Human diplomats helped write a new charter, one that protected the rights of all species, no matter how strong or weak. High Arbiter Thessaly of the Cenari Empire had once looked at humanity with contempt. Now she spoke of them with something close to respect. They had every reason to become tyrants, she admitted in a private conversation. They had the power, the anger, the justification. Instead, they chose to build rather than destroy. I do not understand them completely, but I have learned not to underestimate them. In the colony of New Haven, the world that had started everything, life had returned to normal. The farms produced grain. The mines produced ore. Children played in the streets without fear. Lavra Bennett, who had been mayor during the crisis, stood on her porch and watched the sunset. Her grandson played at her feet, too young to understand what had almost happened to his home. "Grandma," he asked, pointing at a bright light in the darkening sky, "why is that star so bright?" Lavra looked up. It was a human patrol ship, maintaining the peace that had been won at such cost. "Because someone is watching over us," she said, "making sure we are safe." The boy nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to playing. Lara smiled and said nothing more. Some stories were too big for words. Some victories too precious to explain. But the message was clear to everyone who lived among the stars. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Not because they were the oldest or the strongest or the most advanced. Not because they had the biggest ships or the deadliest weapons, but because when they were pushed, they pushed back. When they were threatened, they stood firm. When they were told they were nothing, they proved they were everything. And they never, ever gave up.